Welcome to the Books Applied podcast, presented by WSL Leadership. In this podcast, we talk about an awesome book and how to apply it to your work, sport, or life. I'm your host, Iggy Perillo. Thanks for joining me. On today's episode, we're talking about the book 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman. And I am here discussing this book with Erika Cooley. Erika, can you introduce yourself for the folks listening?
Yeah, my name is Erika Cooley. I live in Portland, which is how I know you. And a few things about me are my hobbies are rock climbing, mostly indoor, but both indoor and outdoor, hiking, being outside, and gardening. For work, I work in healthcare. I'm an occupational therapist working with people who have strokes and brain injuries and spinal cord injuries and helping them get back to everyday life.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
How did you first come across this book? I feel like it was ragingly popular for a little while, a few years back, and then it kind of just got absorbed into the universe we live in. But how did you first come across this book or find it in your world?
Yeah, I just read it this year, 2024, and I read it because a friend of mine who I talk about books with, and usually it's novels, but she recommended this book and said it was really life-changing for her. And I initially was like, yeah, whatever. And then I saw it enough times. I guess it was like marketed to me. And I ended up listening to it while bike commuting, which is how I consume a lot of nonfiction books. And yeah, I just kind of got lucky that I decided to take that recommendation.
Oh, I see. So but a friend who said it changed their life is a pretty strong recommendation. And
yeah.
Would you say it had, and when you brought it up to me, you were like, have you read this book? It's really great. Like, it seemed like it had a really big impact on your perspective or your world. Tell me about that a little bit. Like, how this book, impact your life in times?
Yeah, I think why it impacted me personally is because I tend to be a very logical thinker who wants to do things in the way that's objectively the best way. Which, as we know, is not something you can really achieve most of the time, but that's just how my brain works and what I aim for a lot of the time. And it's hard for me sometimes, on a weekend day, I get analysis paralysis about how do I want to spend my time. And some of that is because I want to be productive, but so much of that is because I want to do the right thing. And I grew up in America, and I feel like a lot of what this book talks about is how we view time and how we view productivity, and all of that is things we were raised with for most of us, especially us Americans. So I think this book for me, more than I wasn't seeking productivity hacks or anything, but it gave me kind of permission to access that simple, satisfying life, which I do deeply, deeply want, but my analysis paralysis definitely gets in the way, and my desire to be effective and efficient and do something meaningful with my life and time.
Productive. Why are we not productive all the time? And productive in the sense of this is a good thing, right? Not productive in he's we value busyness. We're no, we don't want busyness. We want to be productive. So we're not just busy doing stuff, but we're doing meaningful, important things. And he's that's also garbage. I think that's the other lesson of this book, that productivity is a scam all by itself.
Right. And I especially enjoy the historical perspectives that he brings in, especially the kind of initiation of productivity in Western societies where it was factory workers, and how they shifted to have more shift-based work instead of working during daylight hours or working more standard days, so that they could make more money. So obviously it all comes back to capitalism, of course.
Yay!
Yeah. But there's a lot of historical perspective in the book that I really enjoyed. So I think overall, it allowed a part of me that doesn't come out as naturally, but is definitely in there, to be it's okay to just want to spend time doing this thing that doesn't matter, or gardening just for fun, not because you're good at it, or, going on a walk and just enjoying what you see. Because I think we all feel that like there are times when we're really present and we're really in what we're doing. And then most of the other time we're thinking about the future or thinking about how what we're doing impacts the next few steps and what we're going to get to after we do this thing. Yeah. And that's my number one from this book.
Yeah, that's great. I think I really like the historical pieces too about before we had a lot of clocks just hanging around everywhere. We had a much more like solar daylight kind of schedule, and in like agricultural life too. Like you're not gonna rush. You can't rush things. Like things are gonna take the amount of time they take. Like plants take a certain amount of time to grow, and if you're like, cool, I'm gonna be super productive and harvest this early, or I'm gonna be super productive and like not do this thing to take care of animals, domesticated animals or whatever. I think it does not go well, obviously, in the long run. So it doesn't make sense, right? That like this current idea of productivity of like doing more in the time you have doesn't fit with other cycles of like just living. And I think book is sort of a callback to like, there are cycles that are just part of life and living. And productivity is not one of them. Like that's actually not, it's this whole construct that we are like, oh yeah, we need this thing to find meaning. We need to be productive. When I think fundamentally he would say meaning comes from what we create in our lives and the experiences we cultivate for ourselves versus the output of the experiences that we have or the output of the energy we put into the world.
Totally. Yeah. I think kind of going off of that, he like saying that what we create and how we find meaning is what makes our life, meaningful or worthwhile. He at the same time, because that can kind of amplify the importance of meaning in our life, but at the same time, he also like reduces the importance of how we spend our time by saying like our time is finite. We don't even know if we have the next moment. So the fact that we're so productivity and future oriented doesn't really make sense because we don't actually get 4,000 weeks. We might get that much, but we might get one more minute. So maybe we should take the pressure off of ourselves to make our lives the biggest things possible. Because once we leave, we're just gone. Like we're not here anymore. There was something else about that I wanted to say.
I think there's also, he avoids this sort of cliche of like, well, you only have so much time, you should go crazy. Like do all these amazing things you've always wanted to do because you only have so much time. Like he really very deftly avoids that kind of cavalcade of like more consumerism fundamentally, like the whole like bucket list mentality of like, well, I gotta do these 45 things in the next 2 years because time's limited, whatever. And he's like, no, like that's not quite the right answer to pick some extremes or pick like that thing I've always wanted to do, like because we still are living in this future mindset of well, in the future I'm going to be happy because I will have been to that place, done that thing, blah, 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 blah. But in reality, we're still in this present that we are not living in fully because we're thinking of this future self. And so that takes us away from basically the enjoyment of the present because we're still looking to that endpoint, some mythical endpoint that we actually never get to. It's like the diminishing horizon line, right? Like we're always like approaching it like, oh yeah, it's just out there when I make more money, when I have that degree, when I blah, 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 do that, go to that place, when I've seen that thing, when I, have these things lined up in my life. Like those are never actual endpoints that result in a state of satisfied happiness.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he uses an example of like we have a cat, but we're not thinking about in the enjoyment of the cat here and now. We're thinking about the cat's kittens in the future, or the cat's kitten's kitten, if we're like being really honest, because we like to think a few steps ahead. And I think that's a really apt, metaphor way to think about it, because pets are innately only present moment creatures. Like you can enjoy pictures of your cat, but that's not the same thing as being with your cat. One of mine is right there, which is great. Yeah, I think that's a really, really great way to think about the difference in how we view time. And also thinking about how we view time is like an innately modern thing for us to do. Our ancestors didn't think about how much time they had or how they would spend their time. That would have, like, being out of time or not having time wouldn't have made sense to them. He points out. He points out that we think of time as something we can like handle or master, or like a resource that we have that we can spend, but it's actually just we are time. Like, we can think about it as we are time, or that time is the river that we are flowing in. So it's not something you can take a cup and be like, oh, just a little bit here and there. I really like the way he describes that.
Yeah, it's a much more philosophical approach. Like, it's like, if you are time, like, you are still, I mean, it really is just this call back to the present moment. Like, what are you doing right now that matters, or that you're present with? It doesn't have to be the thing that matters. Like, that again is like this productivity mindset. Like, does what you're doing matter right now? And he would say, who cares if it matters?
Yeah.
What do things have to matter? I mean, he goes on this beautiful, like, appreciation of mediocrity and appreciation of doing things you're not good at, and appreciation of doing nothing, and to invest in things that don't have a productive outcome, that are just things you enjoy or are curious about, or, you know, have like an experience to embrace, is better to live this sort of more embodied, direct, present life than this is going to set me up for something else. You know, like we were just saying, this is like for the future, or for some goal that I'm pointing at, because then I'll have a new goal, then a new goal, then a new goal. So I'll never actually feel the state of being present. There's always some further thing to reach for.
Exactly. Yeah. He points out how we all view, a lot of us view our time as something that we will eventually get under control, and then we can spend our life how we want to. But he says, and this really stuck with me, this is not a test run. We are not training for some future life that we're going to have. We're not preparing or perfecting our personalities so that down the road we're better. We're in it now, and the only moment we have is now. Yeah, and he with that, because that draws us to be more present, like you said, he says we also have to fight the feeling that we are being present in order to be more prepared for the future, or like in order to do better work. Like, I'll rest on Sundays and have a Sabbath day, so that the rest of the week I'm more productive. It's like, that totally is not the way to think about it. Like, we should rest for rest's sake, or we should be present for presentness sake.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It definitely called to mind. I forget which one I read first. Rest is Resistance, the Tricia Hershey book, which is another episode of this podcast. Fun listeners can go find that one. But talking about the idea that, like, rest, like, it is like resistance, because it is like pushing back against the status quo of like constant productivity. And so she's like all about, we just need to rest and embrace rest as a thing. And he's like, yes, rest, but also mediocrity, but also just being present in the moment, even in moments when you're not resting. And he talks about the doing really hard tasks is like the only way to actually do hard tasks and make them less hard is to actually do them and be present while doing them. Like, so to distract yourself from doing something really challenging doesn't make it less challenging. It just makes you distracted and makes it more suffering to like be a part of that whole experience, because you're not even present in the experience.
Yeah, totally. I think he talks about the man who was training to be a monk, or who had to douse himself in cold water every day, and he figured out he was trying to distract himself from it, and realized that by focusing on it or being present in it was actually the message he was supposed to get out of that. I actually wonder for you specifically, Iggy, because when we talked about this book, you said it doesn't hit for you as much as I described it hits for me.
Yeah, you were so excited, and I was like, okay, I read it, whatever. Yeah.
Well, I wonder if that is one of the reasons why, because I'm definitely someone who is nervous to, like, I will try things, but I am nervous about failing when I try things. I took a couple art classes, actually 3 art classes over the last couple years, and it really messed with my self-esteem, how absolutely terrible I was at it. And I'm glad I've done it, because I'll keep doing it and keep learning, but it showed me how much I haven't had to struggle that much to learn a lot of the things that I do. Like, school wasn't super hard for me, and I enjoy learning like movement and climbing. And I don't know, it caused me to question how I do with failure. And I see you as somebody who's like very aspirational, who takes on a lot of things and does them well. I don't see you failing necessarily, but like you don't seem like you cut yourself off from things because you might fail at them. Do you identify with that?
I'm not a perfectionist. I definitely identify with that. And so I think I'm okay. I do find that embracing a sort of mediocre standards without going crazy about it. And I do have a quote from the book that I think speaks to me on this very topic. Where Burke writes, peace of mind and an exhilarating sense of freedom come from not achieving validation, but from yielding to the reality that it wouldn't bring you security if you got it.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think a lot of the things we do, and I think, and like we both are performers in different stages where we're literally in front of a crowd, and like there literally is like crowd feedback and validation coming from what you're doing in the moment. And I think that is a piece of my world, right? Like I will be on stage and there will be people either laughing at that or not laughing, like that is very direct, very specific, very personal feedback. And I think I can embrace that as a creative endeavor and like, here's what I'm going to try today, or here's what it is. Like, it can't be an endeavor that I go into with a fixed set of outcomes that I'm looking for. I mean, I'm looking for an outcome, but as an improviser, that's like the type of stage, performance I'm talking about. You can't go in with like, here's my script, here's what I'm going to say today, or here's what I'm going to do today. So it is in some ways even more personal. You're like, oh, that's what came out of my mind and my thought process today. And I don't know what it's going to be before I say it. And I don't know quite how always it's going to land, but it's also a group process. So I know my other teammates with me are going to help lift me up or help, make it better when I do stuff that's actually actively, definitively terrible. Like I make some very bad choices at time. I know you've seen some of the shows when I'm like, that was just really a poor choice there. And like, it's not always amazing. And we have practices where I come home and I'm like, oh, I should have done this. Or like, oh, had I done this? Like I can definitely second guess things. But I think at the time of the actual performance, like, and maybe that's the difference, that I think we probably do things that we know we do well enough, right? Like for you, climbing, like I've climbed, like I have climbed, and it's not a hobby I have currently, but it feels really great when you get to the top, or when you make that route, or when you like solve that bouldering problem, whatever it is like very physical, but also very mental, and also very, there's a definitive goal at the end, right? And I think for improv performance too, there's a definitive goal. Like people need to be laughing. This is comedy. This is not a tragedy we're going for today, people. So I think there's this mix of those things, but at the same time, like for me, I think this is what I told you when you brought it up first. I'm like, I have this sense of freedom, but also like for myself of being like, well, I need to be able to make the choices that I make versus being told to make choices that I should be making. And I think that counteracts some sense of external validation that, well, I need to make choices. Like I definitely want things to go well. And I think it'd be a lie to say like, well, I only value my own opinion of everything I do. Like I don't. Like other people's opinions matter or impact me or, have an effect on me. But by not being a perfectionist, like I think I'm okay if they think it's okay enough. And I think that is where some of this book, I'm like, yeah, cool. Like do some stuff that's okay enough. Like, great. I think I'm doing some okay enough stuff out there. And sure, I could practice or improve or blah, 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 or, put effort into anything. I think broadly speaking, any of us could put more effort into anything we possibly are doing and do it to some standard better, whatever better means for ourselves, for the world, whatever. And to not get caught on that hamster wheel of like, well, I need to do better, I need to do better, I need to do better, is what freedom actually is. To be like, well, I'm doing this okay enough. Like, and this is funny for me, even if it is maybe doesn't land how I think, or maybe if I think like, well, my teammates really saved my butt on that because I said some really stupid things that were off track, or we figured it out together, whatever. Those things are very satisfying in a way that I think more Brene Brown would say, like, if they're in the ring with you, then their opinion matters. Like, if you're on the stage with me, like, yeah, your opinion matters. But if you're in the audience, like, yeah, we're performing for you, but your critique of my work doesn't matter as much to me. And I think I haven't done like a visual art recently. I don't know what your art classes were, if they were painting or sculpture or something like that. Like, to create something like that and then have like expert coaching matters a lot too. To have an expert come in and be like, hey, you know, the shape of this didn't quite, like, is this how you want it to be shaped? And you could be like, well, no, I had a different vision in mind, but this is what I could do right now. And to get coaching to like change the shape of something or change the result of a painting, for example. You're like, oh, I didn't quite use my materials how I expected, or it didn't quite work out for me. Great, get that coaching. Fantastic. And on the flip side, you could be like, you know, that's not what I thought was going to happen, but that's what happened, and I'm okay with that. I mean, that is, I think, the freedom this book is speaking to. And like, there's a lot I think I do that I don't care a ton about in a certain way in terms of external validation of my creative product. I don't take that as a critique of myself.
Yeah, and that's healthy. I mean, that seems really healthy. I think that's really great for you, and maybe you should mentor me. Well, I think you're bringing up a lot of the points that he suggests, especially at the end with he lists 10 tools for embracing infinity, and you brought up a couple of them with what you just said. One of them is serialize.
Yes.
Which I don't feel like I needed his advice about literal to-do lists as much as probably the average person, especially because my work is not as like to-do list oriented as a lot of other jobs are, but I think it's really good advice still. And serialize is his idea that you, instead of having like 10 things you're focusing on and feeling like you're not giving any of those enough time, he says we're always giving most things not enough time. So to pick one big project at a time, or one or two that you're working on at the time. So he gives the example of like, right now I don't have a lot at work and I'm focusing on my kids right now. It's summer. I'm taking my kids on multiple vacations. I'm taking a bunch of time off. I'm focusing on that. Or I have all these things I care about in like local politics. I'm going to choose to focus on this one campaign. I'm going to really go hard and focus on and donate my time and energy to support for the next 3 months. And then I'm going to do something else.
Yeah, definitely like this critique of the multitasker, like the multitasking mindset. It's garbage. I think I'm so advanced. I've been calling myself a monotasker for years. I'm like, just one thing at a time. So advanced. This is really the podcast about my advanced living skills right there for sure.
Yeah. Well, actually, one thing at a time is something I started writing on my daily work schedules during a period of time, because he brings up the concept of the billable hour in the book. And my work is more like that. I have billable time with patients, but it's scheduled out. So I don't have like a ton of control over it necessarily, but feeling like I have to move from thing to thing to thing and do multiple, pieces of paperwork after every session I have with a patient. It got me feeling super rushed, and I still have this problem, but I was realizing that at the end of the day, figuring out what I needed to bring home with me and what stayed at work was like hard for my brain, because I was so in such like a rushed, fast-paced environment or mental environment that I couldn't like rush through that. I needed to think about like my lunchbox and my pen and my schedule and all this stuff. So I started writing that on the top of my schedule, so I would remember like I'm not doing anything good for myself or anybody by rushing through this. And
yes,
I think he'd be proud of us. Oliver Burkeman would be proud of us for that.
We're so advanced. I was recently watching the most recent series of the Bake Off, the Great British Bake Off, and there's this one scene where this one of the bakers is stirring something with one hand and like doing something with his other hand at the same time. I'm like,
Dylan,
okay,
it was Dylan.
Dude, yeah. He was like stirring one pot over here, and then he had something on the stove that he was like cooking up over there. It was very funny. I'm like, I mean, you're probably doing good enough, dude, to literally be like divided between these two simple tasks, right? Like he wasn't like making a croissant with one hand and like a mirror glaze with the other hand for some, like, that's all I've learned about these things are hard to do, people. That's all I've learned from the Great British Bake Off. But he was doing like simple, like he was stirring two things at the same time, right? Mm-hmm. But I think most of us, you're right, like we are not great at doing things. But on the flip side, he also says to embrace our procrastination and distraction. And I definitely noticed that for myself earlier today. I was writing out a story I need to send in for something. And I kept being like, wait, what was some facts? What else was happening there? What else? And I kept, like, I have two screens for my computer. So I'm like writing on one screen, like blah, 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 blah. This stuff happened. Then I'm like, wait, I need another piece of factual information. Then I would go off on this tangent on the other screen of like, what else was happening then? Who else was there? What was the second place team doing? Blah, blah, blah. You know, doing all this research. And I think is okay. It's like when we fight that there are going to be distractions, that's when when distractions are bad for us, or when we fight the fact that we're going to be distracted all the time. Like, I think that was like this other beautiful part of this book. Like, just embrace the fact that distractions are going to happen and procrastination will happen. And that's your brain processing at sort of a different speed. There's this whole beautiful concept of unconscious goal attainment that I love. And that is the idea of like when you're doing the thing, the task, like I'm writing the thing. Okay, great. I have to get it from here, you know, wrap up this thing. But when I'm doing the things like the accessory, like research in very loose air quotes, like I'm still working on the task, but like more subconsciously, like information is filtering through and I'm getting stuff done, but it's not the literal words on the page that I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah, I love that.
I think go ahead.
Okay, I'll go. Yeah, he talks a lot about like limit embracing life, like recognizing your limitations and in time, and also just like in what we're capable of as human beings. And I think distraction is part of that, like knowing that it's not like our max is not 100% focused all the time. Our max is maybe like 50% focused, you know?
If even that, for an hour at a time. And
yeah,
I think this is what Anders Ericsson would say in his book about peak performance, that we can only deliberately practice something. To work toward expertise, we need deliberate practice, which is hyper-focused practice, like whatever it is of a thing. And we can only do that like for maybe 20 to 30 minutes at a time before we run out of glucose in our brain and we just cannot focus anymore on that thing. So if you're like, I'm just going to buckle down and focus and like do this thing for 12 hours straight, like your brain is not going to be performing very well after the first 20 minutes of that 12-hour concentration period. Like you're better off like taking breaks in there. Your brain, your physiology actually can't handle that much focus.
Yeah, I feel like Oliver Burkeman talks about that too, talking about like the writers who crank out hundreds of books a year versus the writers who define success differently, or, you know, in like quality of the work they produce. And they write for like 20 minutes a day or like, 1 hour a day.
And to be consistent, and they stop at the end of their time frame. Yeah. Like you said, that was an important part, to be like, if you want to write a novel and you just write whatever, you have a set amount, 30 minutes a day you're going to write and get a novel done in a year or two. He's like, awesome. But don't write longer than 30 minutes a day, so that the next day you're like, oh, I'm still excited for this thing. I've definitely read some of these, like the tips from the very productive people, and they have very different styles. He is very firm. Burkeman is very firm about being like do it every day, whatever this thing is, or whatever your schedule for it is, and don't do more than you should be doing per day, which I'm like, okay. But let's talk about the other 10 tools for embracing your finitude, which I think is awesome. Adopting a fixed volume approach to productivity, which is what you were just saying. We only have so much time. There's only a fixed volume of our productivity. Yeah, that's it. Don't go too crazy, my friends. Like just adopt.
He recommends for people who have too many things on the to-do list to have the fixed and the open and the closed to-do list. And the closed to-do list can have like 3 or 5 items on it. And you can't those things you're actively working on, and you can't move anything from the open to-do list to the closed one until you cross something off or remove it. You stop focusing on it from the closed list, so that you can only have a fixed amount at a time of things you're working on.
That's great. So specific. Serialize. We talked about that. Decide in advance what to fail at, which I love a lot.
Yeah, that's like what you were saying about being mediocre. At enough that things that you don't need to be perfect about.
They're kind of fun.
Yeah, he talks about intentional imbalance there. That we're not looking for a balance of like 20% me doing my art class and 20% climbing and 20% work. and all 20% of everything else. Like, or it can be like 1% because I'm not good at it and I actually didn't enjoy it that much. And then hopefully someday climbing can be 80% or whatever.
You're going to go pro. I know it.
Oh yeah, I'm going to totally go pro.
I think a friend of mine once said many years ago that like this idea of balance is really a faulty idea, that we want to balance things, which means like this percentage, we're going to divide out 33% of these different things, or or whatever it is. When this buddy of mine was very smart, he was like, we should just look at wholeness. Like, what is like the complete picture that we're going for versus some idea of what balance is supposed to be. And like balance is a sort of external judgment, like a validation of like what it is. Well, is it in balance or not? Like that should be somehow objectively measurable when it's not. Versus wholeness, like, yeah, if wholeness for you means some climbing, some art, some gardening, some work, great. That could be a fine, whatever the proportion of those are, doesn't matter as much as that those are wholly embraced by you within, what you want to be doing or how you want to be spending your time and energy in those moments when you're doing there. And like, fundamentally, who wants to spend their time and energy on a boring job at work? But sometimes we have boring jobs at work we have to do, and it's paperwork or it's whatever piece of it, but we still can be present and embrace those moments of like the challenging task, whatever it is. It can be challenging for many reasons. Feeling purposeless is a challenge for a lot of pieces of work that I think a lot of people have to do, and that's okay. We can still embrace those moments of feeling purposeless in this thing, and that will make us better people, I guess, is the end of the story. Then we'll be very, stoic about it fundamentally.
Yeah, totally. Okay, the next one is focus on what you've already done. So having a done list, not just a to-do list. That one doesn't speak to me a ton, but I feel like there are people in my life who that would really speak to.
I think it is really about celebrating completion of things as a way to detach from constant goal setting. And I think that is the piece of that is like the narrative we collectively, we American society today has is, cool, you've achieved a goal. What's your next goal? What's your next goal? Mm-hmm. What's the next step? What's next? Like this very forward focus on, accomplishment, achievement, whatever that is. When the like focusing on what you've already completed is where you realize what you've learned and where you feel a sense of mastery. Like a sense of mastery of like a topic, a type of work, a skill comes from looking back, not looking forward, because we can always look forward to other things. So I think that's what that is speaking to a little bit, and that like it's okay to essentially like recognize that we've made accomplishments and like we're there. You've accomplished it already, people. Like you're living that accomplishment right now as a way to detach from this ultra forward focus.
Yeah. Or even like going back to the serialized point, you did focus on that for a while. It's even not even accomplishment focused, but just you did spend time on that. And now you're spending time on something else rather than that isn't part of you or your life anymore. This is your life now. It allows you to reflect on things that you focused on in the past.
Yeah. And be multifaceted. It's okay. Next, he has consolidate your caring.
Yeah, similar to what we were saying, and what you seem to have a good view about. Like we care about too many things, and especially with the internet, it makes it really easy to care about find more things to care about, especially the news or like atrocities happening everywhere all the time. So he says we should consciously pick our battles in charity, activism, and politics. And yeah, he talks about like I could do something or almost nothing, something really small for like 10 different goals, 10 different groups or charities or political movements. But what if I just did like 1 to 2 bigger things for like one group at a time?
Yeah. Don't get overwhelmed, people, because I think that's like the classic like empathy fatigue and caring fatigue, like all those sort of like people get like, I care about everything, I have to do it all. Like that's not gonna. We know that story doesn't end well. Like for the people who need to do it all because they care so much about so many things.
Right.
What's next?
Next is embrace boring and single purpose technology, which we've talked about this Love this idea. It's very like it feels very countercultural and tough to like integrate into your life, but he encourages switching your phone to grayscale, which I use that. Relying on items like alarm clocks and iPods to avoid getting like locked into our phones, which is one way that we like unintentionally spend time and totally detach from reality without even realizing it at all, which contributes to our feeling of time just like slipping away from us and not being, we're not the masters of our time. We can't even control our use of our phones.
Yeah, we are the product of all of the social media. Yeah. Like that is like, he talks about that a bit too, that it's not free because you are being sold. Like that is, there's people make money off of you and your attention. Like your attention is what you're selling through a lot of pieces of technology. And I think this has come about for sure. Like the single purpose technologies have, like they make those, I forget what they're called, like, the Dumber and Dumber phones that they have out there that are simpler and simpler. Yeah, exactly. Like, so there are products that like speak to this, which is kind of funny because it's still technology. And there's things we like I actually have a paper atlas in my car. I can't tell you the last time I opened my paper atlas in my car because I'm going to, on my phone, look up the directions or look up the map or look up, whatever. But it's still there just in case. Because there was a time when we used that was how I got around. I went very far places, and this beautiful atlas is going to let me know when the next gas station town is going to be, because there's no way of knowing when you're out there on the countryside sometimes. But it's nice. Yes. Boring technology. Like your technology doesn't need to provide fulfillment for you. And it doesn't. It actually is just a distraction. He talks a lot about distractions for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It ultimately isn't actually is not as interesting as we want it to be. So agreed. Number 7 is seek out novelty in the mundane. So make a choice to do something different and be present in that moment. Pay more attention to your commute, your walk, your coffee making process. Choose to change it up in order to be, practice or just be more present in your everyday moments.
And this actually relates a little bit to something you talked about earlier, which is that creativity comes from doing really uncreative things for a long time. Like you have to be very, like there's some, like people have written before, my friends, like people have spoken before. There are other podcasts out there. I mean, what? I know, shocking. But because it's so ordinary, like if you keep engaging in the ordinary, you'll eventually get to that creative space down the road. And I think that is like the novelty in the mundane. Like there are so many ordinary things we do, like literally in our daily lives, like that are just, we don't even think about, we're not even present for. And so like there is novelty in those spaces too, if we bring our awareness to it, which is a great practice to be present again.
Yeah. One way I've experienced that in my life is by bike commuting, because someone said or wrote on the internet somewhere, like you are actually in the neighborhood that you're biking through when you're biking, and you're just passing through it or kind of seeing it when you're driving. And I definitely notice little changes to trees, and notice when there are more or less birds, or notice when all the Christmas lights are up more than I think I normally would. And after reading this book the first time, I made it an intentional choice when I had the random desire to bike a different way home. I was like, oh yeah, I should do that. he would argue you should do that in order to pay more attention and just get out of your everyday rushing through to get home as fast as you can.
Absolutely. I run in my neighborhood, and I run like very few routes very frequently. And so then you notice more. And also there are times if I'm listening again to an audiobook, I'm like, whoa, I missed that whole block. I don't even know what was happening because I was listening to something else. Like, I guess I'm home now. Like, I don't know. Like, which is weird when you're running versus driving. That happens too. I'm sure you've had the experience where you're just like, oh, I'm headed home. And then you're like, oh, I'm there. Like, you don't quite remember. Then you realize you haven't remembered like the last 5 minutes of your drive or whatever you were doing. Like, not at all weird or scary, but I think running, I actually occasionally go on people's lawns when they have like flowers, like when they have lilacs blooming. There's a fair number of lilac trees. I'm like, I might be on a few lawns here and there, just, stopping in to smell the flowers as I cruise by. Don't mind me, neighbors. Don't mind me. Or there's like lavender growing or other plants. Like there was this whole row of like rosemary. And so if you run your hands through it, you get like the rosemary on your hands. It's pretty great. There's some novelty out there, and it's not all the time. It's not every season that those things are blooming or, growing.
Next one is be a researcher in relationships. So adopt an attitude of curiosity instead of attempting to achieve something or reach a specific outcome. He talks about how, especially, he doesn't talk about relationships that much, but he talks about how with our perspective of, goal oriented, spending our time in goal oriented ways and wanting to achieve and perfect, that takes away from the experience of relationships, and it makes it so we're trying to achieve something in relationships which are not really usually achievable things. So yeah, it's kind of like sad that we need this advice, but we do need the advice of adopting curiosity or being a better listener and just wondering where things will go instead of trying to force them to go into a certain direction.
Yeah, and just bringing that curiosity in again makes you present in those moments with that person, because you can't be sort of haphazardly curious. If you are engaging curiosity, you're engaging in a very present activity, which is, yeah, that's the point, to be present, especially with people and those relationships we have around us. Yeah. Next, he says, cultivate instantaneous generosity, which sounds like a great idea. High fives, everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think generosity is one way to think of it, or just, instantaneous, like spontaneity because generosity of like money is one thing that I think is also really good advice. He's saying, you're approached by someone who's like, donate to this cause. If you delay that because, I want to research it, or I want to make sure it's like in the right way, you probably won't do it. Not that you should donate to any random person who comes up to you on the street, but like when you have the desire to make a donation to a group you care about, or to buy a friend dinner, or to send a letter because you're thinking about that friend, or even a text saying like, I'm thinking about you, satisfying those desires in the moment is a way to connect with ourselves and to be present instead of delaying that or putting it on a to-do list. We're just doing it now because we wanted to do it and it felt good.
Yeah, the generosity of time or attention is, I think, really what he's speaking to, versus, again, like generosity of money is it's a whole own thing. But like to be really generous with, like, and when he says like instantaneous, like in the moment something happens, you're like, oh, I can be present here with these people, or be present in a way that, yeah, I can just be present for this moment with these folks. Like that type of generosity, I think, is very interesting. When I think we more often, if you've ever fly on a plane, you walk down the aisle, people are like, I've sat next to people like on a plane that I haven't talked to for 5 hours. Like there's no, like, I maybe slept or did whatever, or they're reading a book, or they're on their phone, or whatever is happening. Like there's no connection there, when it would have been just as easy to be, like, if there was any opening to be like generous of like attention for that person, it could have been possible. And yeah, not when I'm sleeping probably, but those moments where we're actually in proximity or doing something with people, even though we're sort of maybe would like to default to again, he would say this is how we use our phones to like fill this space for ourselves, to like close ourselves in, when we could be practicing that sort of generosity of spirit with other folks around us.
Totally. And I think when other people do that directed towards me, I really like it. And not that everybody does, because some people are avidly do not talk to me on planes kind of people. But even if they know you, they're like, I don't know you on this plane. But I think if you go to the grocery store and you're standing looking for something like near someone else, when someone says something to me like, geez, there are so many peanut butters these days, I can't even find the one I like, I like that. And I like that person was like, this other human is next to me, maybe with the same goal, maybe not. I'm just going to give them this like charming statement. That's just nice. I can just enjoy it in the moment. And then,
I think it makes like the transactional moments of our lives, like at the checkout at the grocery store, like you can actually talk to people. Like you can talk to the person as you're going through the line. Like that person, like you're looking at them, they're looking at you. There's some little like transactional communication that happens, whatever it is. They're going to say how much it is. You're going to hand them the money, like whatever. But I think you can also engage with them as a person in those same moments. which is super fun. I would say do it, people. It's great. I recommend. Highly recommend. For my other life, selling at street fairs and festivals, like it is like part of it is to like those little micro interactions you have with people are really fun and entertaining. And I mean, they make everyone smile when you're just, like, we were at a rodeo once and I asked people if it was their first rodeo and they would always laugh. Like every time I asked someone at the rodeo if it was their first rodeo. That's all I had to do. Like while we were, making lemonades for folks, was ask them if it was their first rodeo. But it was still more pleasant than being like, just making awkward silent eye contact for 3 minutes. Could have done that.
Right. Okay, last one. Number 10 is practice doing nothing. Doing nothing, I think, to me is like the opposite of hurrying. And we're always kind of hurrying around to get our things done. But he encourages doing nothing. He calls it doing nothing meditation, I think, which is probably triggering for people to hear meditation because that's just recommended all over the place these days. But he says that doing nothing helps you regain your autonomy and stop being motivated by trying to evade how reality really feels here and now, and allows you to just kind of face that.
Yeah. And it's okay. It's okay if it's not productive. It's okay if it's not even like, if it's even undefinable. I think if we're like, cool, I don't need to be productive right now, but I'm going to like learn something for later. Well, I'm going to do something that is very clear cut what I'm doing. I'm going to cook something, or I'm going to read something, or I'm going to talk to a friend about something. I'm going to, do these things. Like, I think you can just lay on the ground. That's okay too.
Yeah. He talks about like nobody's watching you and deciding if what you're doing is good or bad, or if you're more or less prepared for the next moment. It's just you there, and your impact is probably smaller than you think it is. So if you just lay there and do nothing, the world will not explode. I promise.
It will be okay.
It might explode, but it won't be because of you.
Well, and he has to say it's a practice. Like, we have to practice this because we are so used to whatever sense of productivity or goal or future oriented, or we have this list of things like here's the things I want to do in my spare time. And there's like 45 things on that list. And here's like 800 other books I want to read. And here's, 10,000 like things I want to learn that I could just, spend times Googling on like how to do that thing. Yeah. All of that is out there. All that's super accessible, but sometimes we need to do none of that. And like the practice of doing none of that is like you're saying, like a choice of like actually embracing autonomy versus like letting someone control, letting external sources validate our focus as a use for our time.
Yeah. There's one quote in there. I think he's quoting someone else when he's talking about our finitude and how we're limited. And he said, like, some people might think this is depressing, but it's depressing in the same way that a cold shower is depressing. Like a cold shower isn't depressing, but it does like wake you up and make you realize like, whoa, holy cow. Okay. A couple things I want to make sure to say.
Yes. What do you want to make sure to say? I want to hear it.
I have a few things. Okay. One is that the efficiency trap that he talks about is that when we become more and more efficient, we only increase our demand on ourselves. And he uses the example of email as the best example of this. When we get faster and faster and faster going through our inbox and replying to all of our emails, naturally, when you reply to an email, you might get a reply back. And also, if you get, so speedy at going through your email that you become known as the person in the office who is fastest at replying to email, you might start getting more emails because they're like, oh, email Iggy. Iggy will always get back to you within 24 hours. So,
you make it worse by being more efficient.
And then similarly, another historical perspective he gives is that, when women mostly stayed at home and worked, there was a lot of work to do in the house. There was the laundry and the household cleaning, and eventually tools started coming up, being invented that were supposed to save time for women working in the home. And things like washing machines and dryers and dishwashers, they didn't actually save them any time. They just increased the standards that of like cleanliness that we had. So if you can wash your shirt every few days, you will wash your shirt every few days, and then you kind of are held to that standard. So it didn't actually reduce time that much. It just changed our own expectations of ourselves, which I thought was really interesting.
Never ending need for more, whatever that thing is created to do, just create more, more to do of that thing. Like, you have a dishwasher. Now you need to I hope you're using 45 dishes per meal, because now you need to like sort of this hamster wheel of, now you can do stuff faster, but now you have more time to do more of the thing that made that thing hard to do in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. Like, because we can wash our dishes, now you can have a dinner plate and a salad plate and a dessert plate. So I have 3 times the amount to do. Okay, another concept that is kind of in the 10 tips, but I want to make sure we say is the pay yourself first recommendation that he gives. So if you feel like you will only go on a hike or a walk after you get everything done, you're never going to go on a hike or a walk, because you're never going to get everything done. So you should pay yourself first. Like the financial advice, you should also use your time that way. So if you go on a walk right when you get home from work, probably the dishes are still going to get done eventually, because you're going to need to use that dish down the road, or you're going to need to have clean clothes. You're going to wash your clothes eventually, but you're not going to eventually go on a walk, because that doesn't need to happen. So it's, again, another way for us to honor ourselves and face our autonomy, is to just do those things first.
He talks about leisure time is not the time spent getting ready for work. Leisure time was investment in activities that we want to do. And that was the original concept of what leisure meant. And so the 8 hours for work, 8 hours for sleep, 8 hours for leisure kind of daily division. And in early capitalist times, that leisure time was hobbies or activities or something that was not productive and not the sort of preparing for the next work cycle or whatever else you need to be doing.
Yeah, exactly. And then 2 more things. One conclusion I kind of came to for my own life, and I think, a lot of people would agree, that none of the most important things in my life are things that are done efficiently or productively. Like the things I enjoy the most, or spending time with people I love, or even parts of my work that I really, really love are not parts that are done productively or efficiently. So I should stop trying to apply those standards to other parts of my life, to any parts of my life.
I'm surprised neither of us had the most efficient Thanksgiving dinner possible.
Yeah.
It doesn't even make sense, right? To say, well, it was very efficient. If someone asks you, how was that time visiting your grandma? It was very productive. Okay, weird. Doesn't make any sense.
I actually remember someone telling me about their weekend. It was early in knowing them, and they're like, "Oh, it was so productive." And I remember saying out loud to them, "Is that what a weekend's supposed to be?"
No, you're advanced. You're advanced, Erika. That's not what a weekend's supposed to be.
I knew even before reading this book. Okay, and then I think the last thing I want to say that I thought was really funny and great was I talked with a group of friends about this book. One of them, who also is reading Rest is Resistance and likes to talk about that book. I brought this book and a bunch of questions to a group of friends. And one person said, what do I think? Am I going to be the first person to arrive at tomorrow? Why am I rushing so much? And I thought that was really funny and very, very appropriate for, the contents of this book. You can rush all you want, but you're not going to get to tomorrow any sooner than the next person.
I see that when you're flying and you're going to get on the airplane, people are rushing to get to their seat. I'm like, we all land at the same time. It's okay. You're not going to get there first just because you get to your seat first. It's
your seat is in the back of the plane.
Yeah, you're going to get off last. Yeah, exactly. But you're not going to get to tomorrow sooner too. I love that. That's a great perspective on really. I think the big takeaway for me of this book is remind yourself to be more present, but also take action to be more present in these moments, being curious, being a researcher in relationships. Those 10 tools I think are great. Accepting, choose what you're going to fail at first, choose where your focus is, do little things. Yeah. and practice doing nothing.
Choose what you're not going to do at all. Like you can fail at things, or you can also just not do them.
It's okay.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, thanks so much, Erika, for making me talk with you about this book by bringing it up.
And you think is so good for you.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great. I'm glad that you reminded me that I read it, because it flew under the radar for me. But I think it is still worth celebrating what we've accomplished. Your black and white phone, me taking Instagram off my homepage so I don't even look at it. I think there are things that are okay to note that we've accomplished in terms of being present and in terms of being living the life we want to live in a way that is satisfying and engaging for us on our own terms. And that sense of autonomy, I think, is super useful to always have reminders on how to do that better. So thanks for reminding me about this book.
I'm glad we could talk about it. And I'm glad we can talk practically about changes in our daily lives that can help us be more present and face our finitude, as Oliver Burkeman would say, in a way that's more liberating than it is depressing or scary.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be depressing or scary, people. We're all going to die, but that's okay.
Yeah. We don't know when, though.
Yep, exactly. Thanks so much, Erika, for being here on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Iggy.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Books Applied podcast. I hope you enjoyed getting to know a new book and learning how to apply its ideas to make your work, sport, or life a little bit more awesome. For more leadership education-related content, including conflict management checklists, invitations to a fun free lunch that happens monthly, upcoming classes, webinars, and mastermind groups, please head over to wslleadership.com. Thanks, and have a great day.